Welcome, everybody. We're going to try something new on the channel. We're just going to do a weekly comic book kind of show, a news sort of thing. We're just going to pick kind of some different topics and kind of just broach it. Um, so what we wanted to do is we were looking at this week, and Mike and I, initial topic, we want to talk about this, and I guess the inaugural sort of episode of this. We wanted to talk about something that was bugging me and him while we were reading through our books this week. We're reading DC all in. Me and Mike have been reading some Marvel. We've really, with X-Men rebooting and all these comics rebooting, we have tried to kind of get invested in these universes. And while some have hit and some haven't, there's a recurring theme that we thought we'd talk a little bit about in this. Are comic books embarrassed that they're comic books? Have comic books gotten to the point where the writers and the artists and just the overall companies are almost embarrassed of the origins of what this is, embarrassed of the escapism, and they're trying too hard to elevate it or make it grounded or realistic or whatever it may be? So, Mike, I'll kick it to you. Do you think comic book creators and the comic book industry right now is too embarrassed of what this medium is and is trying to make it different to get away with that?
Sometimes it feels like that. These things are written to give us a little bit of an escape in the middle of maybe a rough day, or at the end of a rough day. You want a little bit of escapism, and these stories are totally. These characters are designed to do that. Um, what made it special when creators from days gone past grounded, tried to ground it in reality, was was a short-lived event that kind of said something. Maybe it was just one issue or part of one issue, where they took. The classic example is the Green Lantern Green Arrow series from the 70s that we've talked about so many times. That groundbreaking series when the country was going through turmoil, and Green Lantern and Green Arrow kind of take to the road to kind of get the pulse of the nation. That was kind of interesting. It made it very special, and it's a historical comic book story at this point, 50 years later. But for the last couple of decades, it just feels like sometimes we feel like we need to inject more realism, or we use it for a platform to express opinions on personal
Politics, current issues, yeah.
beliefs. Yeah. And we kind of, for us older comic book fans, it's okay um to get away from that, because that's what we're reading comic books for. Let's face it.
Yeah.
We're a bunch of older guys and some gals too, who like this kind of stuff, but we read it for the escapism. We read it for the fantastical nature of taking us away for a moment to another place in time, where some really good guys help set the world straight, and gals too, like Wonder Woman back there, kind of show us the right path in humanity and the clash that they have with the forces of evil that come to bear in this world, that we all have to deal with it at one, in some level. And comic books are escape, where things are kind of simple. The strife might be difficult, but it's worth the effort. And in the end, we see that the good guys win. I don't like seeing, it's important for the story for the good guy to lose once in a while, and that makes it interesting, and the conflict and the tension of the story rises. But we got to see him win, and we got to see him, and it's kind of unfortunate sometimes they take these characters to dark places. But yeah, what do you think about it, Reed?
Yeah, I do think as I've read it more, I would say I do think a lot of the people who are in the medium right now are embarrassed of what the medium is. And I think that is why we get so many divisive stories and so many stories that people just absolutely hate at times, because what we have a tendency to do now is we get people who, I don't want to write a comic book. I want to write like my personal journey or my story and use characters for that. And there's nothing wrong with expressing your personal opinions on anything, but you can't do it through Batman. Can't do it through Spider-Man or some of these other characters unless it fits with who that character has been. And I think it's interesting that you bring up that Neil Adams and Denny O'Neil, the hard traveling heroes, Arrow and Green Lantern thing. Um, I think you can throw into the mix Frank Miller with Batman Year One and Dark Knight Returns. You can throw in Alan Moore with Killing Joke and Watchmen. I think the thing is, while I have a lot of love and respect for those older stories, I do think you can look at their legacy and say the legacy of those has really been negative for comic books because it was kind of the final push that the medium needed to kind of completely remove younger children from the medium and kind of go, okay, this is more of an adult oriented thing with these characters who are for kids. And I think that the interesting thing for me on it is I do feel like it's actually a worse medium for it. Like you said, this is escapism. This is supposed to be something that I don't need Batman grappling with the United States economy in 2024 or modern day politicians or things like that. You can write a character in there, like Batman can battle Rupert Thorne or battle Lex Luthor, and they can be written to resemble maybe some figures in modern culture, but not like exactly quoting words from them. Otherwise, it removes you from it, right? But you can have a villainous character kind of take on aspects of a modern person that's a villain, but you have to be really adept at doing that. And what I will say is the reason the Alan Moores and the Frank Millers and the Denny O'Neills and those guys worked is you're talking about a higher class level of writer, right? You're looking at some of the legends and the heavyweights who were able to take the medium and do it well. We have a lot of people now who can't do that as well. And so when you don't have Alan Moore's skill level or you don't have Frank Miller's skill level and you try to be Frank Miller, it's kind of like if I decided I'm going to go out and try to dunk the ball like Michael Jordan, that's not going to go so well. He was able to do that because of who he was. And I think what we've had happen too much now is, yeah, I do think they're embarrassed of. I don't want to do a short little one-off zany adventure with Spider-Man because that doesn't, leave an impact, and the world isn't different because of that. And I think it's a fundamental misunderstanding of what these characters represent. I think the thing that makes a Spider-Man or a Batman great is that it's that joy that kids get when they see that character. Like I'm always just so reminded when I take my 2-year-old down the toy aisle and he sees Spider-Man and how much his little face lights up at seeing that mask, right?
Right.
Or when we watch this, Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends cartoon, and the Hulk says Hulk smash, and how much he just runs around and starts like hitting the little couches and just loves it. And it's like that is how these superheroes change the world. That is how they do good things. It is the joy they bring to those. And as adults, we get to connect with a little piece of our childhood as we're older with some of these stories that you can read and they're good and they're entertaining. I just think we need to get the medium back to where it is maybe aimed a bit more at 8 to 10 year olds. And again, that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be stupid or zany or just ridiculous. You have stuff like Batman the Animated Series that was always able to balance a kid's cartoon with some elements that if you were an adult, you could look and go, oh, it's touching on some really unique themes, but it's using Batman in a cartoon. I think you've always used the example of like Pixar, right? Toy Story. If you sit down and watch Toy Story, right, as a kid, you just enjoy Woody and Buzz and its toys and it's they're having all these adventures. As an adult, you get on themes of abandonment and being replaced and friendship and all these different things that you take from it. And I do wish the comics were a little less embarrassed to be comic books anymore. Do you think I'll kind of bridge on this? Do you think this is why comic sales have struggled a little bit? Do you think that loss of the escapism, the loss of that kind of childlike enthusiasm behind the writing and stuff like that has damaged it? Do you think that's a little bit of why we are where we are with the overall landscape where it's fallen so much?
Well, you completely alienated its original target audience,
Mhm.
which was kids, which was what was so great about what Marvel did in the 60s was kind of ride that line where you have an adult themed story that also children could enjoy. And that's the magic secret sauce. And not everybody has that, right? Not everybody has that. And I do feel that, you know, as a writer, you got to kind of feel like, I have all this stuff to tell. And the way Stan Lee tells his story, he was that way too.
Mhm.
And he was a frustrated writer who was working in this medium. And when he, decided he was going to take the Marvel bullpen and guide them in a way that made more sense to adults, and that really changed everything. It can be done. It's not being done, but I do think, we're a shrinking demographic. These older folks that started, buying comic books, especially some younger folks, the generation after me. They started like in the '90s when Dark Knight came out and Watchmen came out, and those comics really spoke to us, and it was an important part for the medium at that time because
Mhm.
the audience was almost all completely older. But don't alienate those younger folks. You can write stories that you know toe the line in both areas and make them entertaining. You really can. But if you're a frustrated writer and you're kind of mad that you're writing comic books, then maybe you shouldn't write comic books. I think there's a place for those kind of stories, and the indie markets are full of them, and they're done really well and great. There's a lot of great work going on over in the indies. But as far as these legacy characters, we really do want our nostalgia because that's special for us culturally, and we want them back to where they're just the good guys fighting against the bad guys, and come up with creative stories where they save the day, or sometimes not. They fall short because they're flawed, but they're
Mhm.
always striving, and that's the kind of thing that this medium has put into the modern American culture, similar to the gods and goddesses of days of yore. In all older civilizations, you had to have this mythology, and in our very, very young culture, these characters have become our mythology. And while the characters can grow and change over time, we really do want them to stick to their roots. And that's where this untapped younger audience really is. We get back to the storytelling that these characters were anchored in, and you'll do better. And oh, by the way, maybe some kids will start picking them up.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I think there's a few creators left. I think like Jeff Johns, and I think he's the one that most starkly shows, I think, where he seems to still write comic books like they're for kids at times, I think. And yeah, he's had some more mature stuff in there. And I think as he got a little more long in the tooth at DC, he got a little bit away. But when you go back to some of his original DC stuff like Flash and Green Lantern and things, why those runs were great is it just felt like Green Lantern issues. Like it didn't feel like Jeff Johns thought I'm using this as a platform to change the world. He looked at it as I'm just going to write an entertaining story, and this will bring people joy. And I think that's the thing that you and I have always liked about this medium is when we highlight the comics that we love, even when it deals with stuff that's a little more, dark, like we've always talked about Conan. I think one of the reasons Conan is so good is, yes, that's a more mature audience comic book. But Jim Zub's just writing a Conan story. Jim Zub's not writing some story about, I need to define the human experience and talk about, no, he's just writing a Conan story. And whereas an audience will connect with that because we love that character and that story.
That's what we want.
And that's, I think, if we would get back to that with Spider-Man and the Flash and Batman, I wish I could just sit down with some of these comic writers and go, look, man, if you really want to write something about economic disparity and differences in the American culture and the upbringing and the experience of people, that's great, good for you. Go work for MSNBC or ABC News or Fox News or Wall Street Journal or whatever publication suits your fancy. Go work for one of those or try to work for them and become a reporter who can really dig into that stuff. But you're writing Spider-Man right now. So how about we have Spider-Man stop a bank robber,
And
save
we
the day, and go
and,
home.
and we
Like,
want to break from all that stuff anyways, right?
yeah.
Because it is being forced down our throats. But no, I really think that there's a place for those creative people, but it's just hard to shoehorn one of these legacy characters into that story in a modern way. It kind of does kind of fall flat. It comes
Well,
across as a little
it's kind of
preachy.
it's just mixing things that don't mix well. I think the thing is it's like if someone wanted to make a Mario game, like a super serious Call of Duty shooting game. Like it
Okay.
doesn't work. It's Mario. Go jump on the
Yeah.
stinking mushroom and save Princess Peach. Like you
Yeah.
don't need to have Mario fighting in World War II castles again. It does not work. And again, maybe someone who's amazing could make that work once. But that
Yeah.
would be a one-off thing where that shouldn't become the future. And that's the thing is, I think sometimes they just miss the impact of, look, you're trying to write some magnus opus thing that you think is going to change the world in the vein of stuff like Les Miserables did when it came out for French people or stuff like that, right? That became this revolutionary book that people wanted to read, or stuff like Fahrenheit 451 and things like that that changed how people saw things or opened people's eyes to things. You're not going to do that. It's a comic book. But you know how you do change the world through a comic book? You write enjoyable adventures that kids, adults, that fathers can share with their sons, that mothers can share with their daughters, or fathers with their daughters, whatever mix that you want to have there. You have these universal stories that adults can enjoy, they can share with their children. You create that bond. That's how you change the world through comic books. That's how you make something that lasts and impacts more people. And that's why we love Stan Lee. That's why we love Jack Kirby. When we look at those guys, is I've never met Stan Lee, but Stan Lee, I would have to say, in the cultural lexicon of people outside of my immediate family members and a few select other people, there's very few people who have had as profound an impact on my world and joy in my life as he and Jack Kirby did with what they did in creating those characters and the amount of joy and things that have been there. And I say that as a DC Comics fan, even that figure,
And
his
and then
impact is so much greater because of what he did just by creating those stories.
and can I just go back and say I really love the Mario Call of Duty analogy. That was really good. That was kind of like on point. So thank you for that, Reed. But yeah, I mean, Stan and Jack, you know, yeah, Stan and Jack, man, they
I
really,
just don't be embarrassed that it's a comic book. I think that's what I wish I could
yeah.
just get. It's a comic book. It's okay that it's a comic book. Just write something fun, write something enjoyable. Occasionally, you can put some darkness into it and layer it so that there's stakes and we learn and we figure things out. But I think at the end of the day, we could use a lot more of, instead of being lectured about something, I think we could just use a lot more being entertained by something. And just we can learn from Peter Parker, with great power comes great responsibility, and use that in our lives as opposed to having to have Peter Parker make comments that directly relate to things happening on the news. It's just not something that we need, I think, anymore. But
It,
that's what we think on this, guys. Let us know what you think below. As always, we appreciate you watching on. We're gonna kind of end up with a couple of things here before we wrap up. We're gonna do our weekly "What is in the stack?" Because some we're gonna start just what's in our stack of comics that we're reading. Not necessarily new stuff, could be old stuff, whatever it is that we are working our way through in addition to our new of the comics. So, Mike, what are you working your way through this week? What's in your stack for this week?
I, I've got this big omnibus of old Steve Ditko stuff.
Steve Ditko. Okay. So
His
we're going with one of the legends.
pre Spider-Man stuff from Mystery Tales. This is stuff that was done in the late 50s. And it's just a joy to see, his older, his older style and kind of like what he was doing before Spider-Man. He was interested in these little short tales, and his artwork is just great, It's
Mhm.
very cartoony and yet wonderful. Look at this cover. I mean, but I'm really enjoying reading some of these stories. They're so short, it's unbelievable that they are really that short. But yes, they are. They're like, 5 pages. Just great artwork and great quick storytelling. And I'm really enjoying it. Here's some of his stuff that will end up in Doctor Strange a few years
Yeah,
later.
you kind of see where some of that starts out
Yeah,
for
yeah.
sure.
And so that, most people don't read these older stories, but they have been published in omnibus form. And I'm going through, I'm having a lot of fun reading them. How about you, Reed? What do you got?
Nice. I finally broke down and read. I'm reading Squadron Supreme, so Marvel's kind of take on the Justice League with like Hyperion and Nighthawk. I think it's Mike Grunwald on this.
Okay.
I'm enjoying it somewhat so far. Obviously, it's a complete ripoff of Justice League. It's a
Yeah.
very it's interesting, and it's almost a Watchmen-esque comic in terms of I do think the art it's not bad. You get kind of like a character like Nighthawk, very much Batman.
Yeah.
And they're right there. It
When did that series
I
come
think
out?
this was in the late 80s when this came out. I think it says yeah, so
Interesting.
late 80s, I believe, with it. Let's see if I can find the original published on this. So yeah, this was published in 1985. So I think it kind of has an almost Watchmen tone where it's showing these characters um
But it was
more
before
like what would it
Watchmen,
be, what would they
right?
actually do with their superpowers and things like that. It's not quite as dark as Watchmen, but there is some things that it touches on. Again, kind of it was one other thing that when we talked about our comic books embarrassment comic books, I kind of looked at this one too, and I'm like it's not bad. I've never read through it. Everyone's always told me as a DC fan I should try to check it out because it was Marvel's basic version of the DC characters. So there's so many similar Hyperion and Power Princess for Wonder Woman and Superman. You got Nighthawk. There's some enjoyment in it. I'll have to let you know when I completely finish it. I had never read it all the way through because I was like, I don't care about Marvel's version of, the Justice League. I'll just go read the Justice League. But I found this at a decent price. Thought I'd check it out. It's good art. It's good writing. I'll have to see how it ends, though. There are some elements I'm not loving in it, but overall, really good. And I do see where some fans would absolutely gravitate towards it and say it's a classic, and that it's pretty good. But it'll be interesting. It's fun to work our way through, read some of these old stuff while going through the newer comics that are coming out. Let us know for you guys what's in your stack for this week. What are you reading? What are you looking through? Is it just new comics? If you're reading some old classics, let us know. It's always interesting to see what you guys have. We've seen some great recommendations in comics for you and I. We've actually even picked up a few of these indie books. People have kind of commented in some of our older videos and started reading. I know for me, Ghost Machine, there was a lot of people talking about Ghost Machine when it was releasing in the comics, and that was one of the biggest reasons I picked it up. And
Yeah,
man,
me too.
I've enjoyed the heck out of that since it came out. So, if you guys have anything that you're reading, let us know what you think. That'll kind of wrap it for our first one of these. We'll do these once a week, just kind of go through a simple talk and go through what's in our stack. Let us know what you guys think below. Do you think comics are too embarrassed to be in comics anymore? Do you think they need to get back to being a little more adventurous, a little more escapism, and things like that? And what is in your stack? As always, folks, thank you guys for watching. We'll catch you in the next video. God bless you.
Thanks, everybody.